The galaxy was burning. Across the stars, fleets of war clashed like storms of fire. The Veyari Empire, proud insectoid rulers of dozens of systems, were being torn apart by a merciless enemy. The Draxan swarm, vast, brutal, and endless, had come like a tide of blades. Planets fell. Colonies burned. Armies crumbled before their hunger. And in the middle of this chaos, the Veyari queen had lost the only thing that truly mattered to her, her daughter, Princess Lyrina. The abduction happened during a raid on a frontier world. The Draxans had struck with terrifying precision, bypassing defenses, targeting the palace directly. Soldiers fought and died in swarms, but the princess was taken. In the days that followed, the queen's grief was felt across the empire. She screamed for vengeance. She promised endless war. Yet behind her anger was a deep wound. For what was an empire without hope? And what was a queen without her child? The High Council tried to assure her the princess was likely dead. The Draxans did not keep prisoners long, but the queen refused to accept it. She ordered every ship, every spy, and every ally to search the stars for her daughter. She even offered rewards so vast that mercenaries and bounty hunters flooded into Veyari space. But months passed. Nothing. And far away, on a small human outpost orbiting a quiet star, Captain Daniel Reyes listened to the galaxy's chaos with tired eyes. Daniel was a soldier from Earth, part of the Human Defense Forces, a relatively new presence in galactic politics. Humanity was considered strange, unpredictable, and far too reckless by most alien species. Many looked down on them as death-world savages who had somehow stumbled into space. But Daniel knew something others did not. Humans had survived worse, and survival was in their blood. The outpost where he served was quiet. It wasn't a grand fortress or a shining colony. It was just a listening post, a cluster of satellites and antennas watching the void. Humans had agreed to monitor this region as part of their small alliance with the Veyari Empire. Daniel had been stationed there for nearly a year, and most days were the same: reports, scans, silence. But on one night, as he sat staring at the endless field of stars, something changed. The system detected a distress signal. At first it was faint, broken, and impossible to read. It could have been static. It could have been a trick. But Daniel leaned closer, adjusting the filters, replaying the signal again and again. And slowly through the noise a sound emerged, a voice. Not human, not machine, alien, fragile, young, please. Help! Daniel froze. His heart pounded in his chest. He recognized the voice from the Veyari archives, from reports he had read during his service. It was the missing princess, Lyrina. Impossible, one of his fellow officers muttered when Daniel showed him the recording. That child is dead. You know the Draxans. They don't keep prisoners. Maybe they made a mistake, Daniel said, his jaw tight. Maybe she escaped. Maybe she's still alive out there. Even if she is, it's none of our business. Orders are clear. Humans are not to interfere in Veyari matters, especially not royal ones. But Daniel couldn't let it go. He listened to the signal again and again, hearing the weak cries. There was something in her voice, fear, pain, but also hope. And Daniel thought of his own sister back home on Earth, the one he had left behind when he joined the military. He imagined her calling out in the dark, waiting for someone, anyone, to come. And in that moment, Daniel made his choice. He would go, even if it meant disobeying orders. Even if it meant risking his career. Even if it meant flying straight into the jaws of the swarm. The next day, Daniel prepared quietly. He checked the hangar, choosing one of the smaller scout ships. It wasn't much, old engines, weak shields, and just enough space for one pilot. But it had stealth plating, meant for slipping past patrols unnoticed. He loaded extra rations, a plasma rifle, and a set of knives. He knew he wouldn't have backup. He would be alone. As he walked through the hangar, a young technician spotted him. "Captain, where are you going?" Daniel gave her a tired smile. "Just stretching my legs." He climbed into the cockpit and sealed the hatch. His hands hovered over the controls for a moment. Then, with a deep breath, he powered up the engines. The outpost alarms blared as his ship disengaged from the docking clamps. His commanding officer's voice shouted over the comms, "Reyes, what the hell are you doing? This is unauthorized. Return at once." But Daniel cut the channel. His eyes were fixed on the stars. "I'm sorry, sir," he whispered, "but someone has to bring that kid home." The scout ship shot into the void. The journey was long and dangerous. Draxon patrols filled the border regions searching for prey. Daniel used every trick he knew, hiding behind asteroid fields, cutting power to drift silently, timing jumps between patrol sweeps. His ship rattled, his system strained, but he pressed on. Days turned into a blur. Sleep was short, food was rationed, and every sound in the dark felt like death closing in. But Daniel never turned back. He replayed the princess's signal each night, reminding himself why he was out there. Finally, after endless searching, he found something. The signal grew stronger. He traced it to a sector deep in enemy territory near a broken moon orbiting a dead planet. There, hidden among debris fields, was a massive Draxon slave transport ship. It was old, scarred from battles, but still functional, and inside the signal pulsed faintly. Alive. Daniel clenched his fists. He had found her. But now came the hardest part. How was one human supposed to fight his way into a ship filled with monsters? How was he supposed to save a princess guarded by an entire swarm? He stared at the ship in silence. His heart raced, his breath heavy. Logic told him to run, to report this to command, to let someone else handle it, but then he remembered the voice. Please, help. Daniel gritted his teeth. All right, kid, hold on. I'm coming. He began planning his infiltration, his mind racing with reckless, desperate ideas. The galaxy had already given up on the princess. The queen had already begun mourning. The council had already accepted defeat, but not him, not a human soldier. The Draxon slave transport floated in the dark like a wounded beast. Its hull was scarred with burns and cracks, but the light still pulsed across its surface. The ship was huge, far larger than Daniel's tiny scout craft. It looked like a mountain of metal crawling with life. From his cockpit, Daniel studied it carefully. Dozens of docking bays, patrolling drones, spikes of alien metal jutting out like the bones of some predator, and inside he knew were thousands of prisoners. Somewhere among them was the princess. All right, he muttered, his hands tightening on the controls. Time to do something stupid. He cut his engines and drifted closer. His stealth plating helped, but it wasn't perfect. The Draxons were hunters by nature, they noticed everything. If he stayed too long in one place, they would see him. Daniel maneuvered toward one of the smaller docking bays. The doors opened and a swarm of insectoid figures marched out carrying crates. Their armor was jagged, their movements sharp. Draxons looked like nightmares. 6 limbs, spiked carapaces, and glowing eyes filled with hunger. He waited until the group left, then guided his ship into the shadow of the docking bay. With a deep breath, he pulled a dark cloak over his armor, grabbed his plasma rifle, and opened the hatch. The air hit him like fire, hot, heavy, and filled with the stink of oil and rotting meat. He coughed once, then forced himself forward. Inside the bay, he moved silently, keeping to the shadows. The Draxons weren't expecting a human. Why would they? To them, humanity was a small, unimportant race, too weak to matter in a galaxy of giants. Daniel smiled grimly. That underestimation was going to be his advantage. He made his way deeper into the ship, past rows of cages where alien prisoners were kept. The cries and whispers of the captives filled the air. Some looked up in confusion as he passed. A human soldier alone? They thought he was mad. Daniel stopped only once at the side of a cage. A frail reptilian prisoner looked at him with wide, hopeless eyes. Daniel placed a finger to his lips. Not here for you, he whispered, but I'll come back if I can. The alien nodded weakly, but Daniel could see in his eyes that he didn't believe him. No one came back for slaves. Daniel pressed on. Finally, he reached a large chamber. And there, in the center, behind an energy barrier, was the princess. She was smaller than he imagined, delicate, with translucent wings folded tightly against her back. Her eyes glowed faintly in the dim light, filled with fear and exhaustion. Chains bound her arms. 2 Draxon guards stood nearby, clicking their mandibles as they spoke in their harsh language. Daniel's chest tightened. This was her, Princess Lyrina. He pulled a small device from his belt, a human-made EMP charge. Crude compared to alien tech, but effective. He whispered a prayer, pressed the button, and tossed it toward the guards. The explosion was silent but bright. Sparks flew as the energy barrier collapsed. The guards screamed, their armor sparking, their weapons shutting down. Daniel rushed forward before they could recover. He moved like a storm, rifle blazing, then switching to his knife when one lunged too close. The fight was brutal and fast. When it was over, both guards lay still on the floor. The princess stared at him in shock. Daniel lowered his weapon slowly. "Princess Lyrina?" Her mandibles trembled as she spoke. Who are you?" "Captain Daniel Reyes, human soldier." He knelt and cut her chains. "I came to take you home," she blinked, confused. "A human? Why would your kind risk this?" Daniel smiled faintly as he pulled her to her feet. "Because no child should be left behind." For a moment she just stared at him. Then slowly tears filled her eyes. But there was no time for words. Alarms began to blare. The EMP had done its job, but it also alerted the entire ship. The walls shook with the sound of marching feet. "Stay close," Daniel said. He grabbed her hand and together they ran. The corridors filled with Draxons. Warriors hissed and charged, claws raised. Daniel fought with everything he had. Plasma fire lit the halls. Knives slashed in close combat. Every move was desperate, every breath heavy. Lyrina tried to stay behind him, but once, when a Draxon nearly grabbed Daniel from the side, she screamed and threw a broken chain at the attacker's head. It bought Daniel just enough time to finish the fight. "You're braver than you look," he told her, panting. She almost smiled. "You fight like a beast." "Thanks," he said dryly, firing again. They finally reached the docking bay, but it was swarming with enemies now. Daniel scanned quickly. His scout ship was still hidden in the shadows, but the way was blocked. "All right," he muttered. Plan B," Lyrina asked. "Make one up as we go," he said. They sprinted toward the far side of the bay. Daniel spotted a fuel line running along the wall. He grinned. Humans had a talent for turning anything into a weapon. He shot the line and fuel sprayed across the floor. Then he tossed a thermal grenade. The explosion ripped through the bay. Fire roared, consuming dozens of Draxons in seconds. The swarm screamed, their armor cracking under the heat. Daniel and Lyrina dashed through the chaos, reaching his ship. He shoved her inside first, then jumped in after her. The engines roared to life. Alarms filled the cockpit as enemy weapons locked on. "Hold tight," Daniel shouted. The scout ship blasted out of the docking bay just as another explosion ripped through the fuel tanks behind them. Fire lit the void as the slave transport shuddered. But the Draxons were not finished. Fighters swarmed from the ship, chasing them like predators hunting prey. Energy beams slashed across the stars. Daniel pushed the engines to their limit. The ship rattled violently. Sparks burst from the panels. "Can we make it?" Lyrina shouted, clutching the seat. Daniel gritted his teeth. "We don't have a choice." He twisted the controls, weaving between asteroids, dodging enemy fire by inches. The Draxons pressed harder, their numbers overwhelming. Daniel's ship shook as a beam struck the side. Warnings screamed. "Hull integrity failing. Shields collapsing." Lyrina turned to him, fear in her eyes. "We're not going to survive, are we?" Daniel shot her a hard look. "Not today. You're going home. I promised." And with that he dove the ship into an asteroid field. Rocks the size of mountains tumbled around them. The Draxons followed, but their larger ships struggled to maneuver. Daniel weaved through gaps so narrow that sparks flew from the hull. One by one, the Draxon ships crashed against asteroids or were destroyed by friendly fire. Daniel flew like a madman, every instinct screaming, every nerve burning. Finally, only silence remained. The radar cleared. The Draxons had lost them. Daniel slumped back in his seat, panting. His hands shook from adrenaline. Lyrina stared at him with wide, glowing eyes. Slowly she whispered, You saved me." Daniel managed a small smile, though exhaustion weighed on him. "Told you. No child left behind." For the first time she allowed herself to believe it. But outside the window the stars stretched endlessly. They were deep in enemy territory, far from safety. The stars stretched endlessly before them, cold and silent. Daniel's small scout ship drifted through the void, its engines sputtering. The escape from the Draxon transport had left the ship battered. Hull plating was scorched, shields were almost gone, and half the systems blinked red with warnings. Daniel leaned back in his chair, sweat dripping from his brow. His hands still trembled from the chase. Every muscle in his body screamed for rest, but he couldn't stop yet. They were deep in enemy territory, and the Draxons would not forget what he had done. Beside him, Princess Lyrina sat silently, her wings folded close to her back. Her glowing eyes scanned the stars with a mix of awe and fear. She had never flown in such a small, fragile craft. She had grown up in palaces of crystal and warships of gold. To her, this human machine felt like a coffin barely holding together. Finally, she broke the silence. "Why?" Daniel glanced at her. Why what? Why would a human... You risk everything to save me? I am not your kind. My people did not even trust yours. The queen, my mother, she never believed in humans. Daniel gave a tired laugh. Yeah, I noticed. He adjusted a flickering control panel with a smack. But where I come from, it doesn't matter what species you are. A kid in trouble is a kid in trouble. You don't leave them behind. Lyrina tilted her head, confused. Is that normal for humans? Daniel's eyes hardened. Memories of Earth flashed through his mind. Disasters, wars, tragedies, and the countless times humans had thrown themselves into danger for strangers. Yeah, pretty normal. For a moment, Lyrina just stared at him. Then she whispered softly, almost to herself. Strange creatures. Daniel smiled faintly. You're not the first to say that. The days that followed were long and brutal. The ship limped across the stars, staying hidden among asteroid fields and dark nebulae. Daniel rationed their supplies, half a protein bar for him, half for her, and recycled water from the ship's struggling systems. Sleep came in short, broken hours, with one of them always awake in case the Draxons appeared. Lyrina tried to help where she could. She learned quickly, following Daniel's instructions with sharp intelligence. She cleaned the filters, rewired damaged circuits, and even patched the hull with emergency sealant. Her hands were delicate but steady. Daniel found himself impressed. You're not bad, he said one evening as they worked together on a broken power coil. Her mandibles twitched in what might have been a smile. I was taught many things as heir to the throne, but I was never taught how to survive. She looked at him seriously. You humans, you live survival every day, don't you? Daniel chuckled. On Earth, even the plants want to kill you. Survive or die, that's how it is. Lyrina fell quiet, her eyes thoughtful. She began to see why other species feared humans. Not because of their weapons or their numbers, but because of their refusal to give up. But danger was never far. One night, alarms blared as Draxan scouts appeared on the radar. Daniel cursed and threw the ship into evasive maneuvers. Energy beams sliced past them, lighting the void. Hold on, he shouted. The little ship twisted and spun through debris fields, using broken asteroids as cover. Lyrina clung to her seat, eyes wide, but she didn't scream. Instead, she studied his hands, how calm and steady they were even in the chaos. At the last moment, Daniel cut power completely, letting the ship drift cold and silent among the rocks. The Draxan scouts swept past, scanning, searching, but they missed him. When the radar finally cleared, Daniel restarted the engines with a heavy sigh. That was close, he muttered. Lyrina turned to him, her voice steady. You fly like you fight. Like you are always on the edge of death, Daniel smirked. That's called being human. As the journey stretched on, the bond between them grew. Lyrina asked about Earth. Daniel told her stories of oceans so wide you couldn't see the other side. Of forests filled with life, of mountains taller than cities. He spoke of music, laughter, and the way humans always found a way to smile even in the darkest times. And in return, she spoke of her mother, the queen of the Veari, strong, proud, but also gentle when she was alone with her daughter. She described the gardens of crystal where she used to play, the songs of her people that filled the halls at night. Sometimes, when Daniel closed his eyes, he could almost see it. And he swore to himself he would bring her back to that life no matter what it took. But shadows waited even among supposed allies. As they drew closer to Veari space, Daniel intercepted encrypted transmissions. Not all within the Empire wanted the princess returned. Some factions had begun to see opportunity in her absence. A dead heir meant political reshuffling. A living one meant old power restored. Daniel cursed under his breath as he read the messages. If they made it back, they might not only face enemies from without, but betrayal from within. He didn't tell Lyrina. She had suffered enough. But in his mind, the mission became heavier. It wasn't just about getting her home. It was about making sure she survived long enough to stand beside her mother again. On the 6th day, disaster struck. The ship's reactor, already unstable, finally gave out. Alarms screamed, lights flickered, and the engines died. The ship drifted powerless in the middle of nowhere. Daniel slammed his fist against the console. Damn it, she's gone. Lyrina looked at him with fear. What do we do? Daniel closed his eyes for a moment. He thought of all the times humans had survived impossible odds. On broken rafts in endless seas, in frozen wastes with nothing but fire, in deserts with only grit and stubbornness. He opened his eyes, hard and steady. We fix it, or we die trying. For hours they worked in the heat of the failing systems. Daniel crawled into the reactor chamber, his skin burning from the radiation shielding barely holding. Lyrina passed him tools, her hands trembling but determined. Sparks flew, panels burst, but they didn't stop. Finally, with a roar of engines, the ship came back to life. Daniel collapsed onto the floor, coughing, his face pale. "You're hurt," Lyrina whispered. He waved it off. "Just another scar. I've got plenty." But in her eyes he saw something change. Not just gratitude, but respect. She realized this human wasn't just reckless. He was willing to break himself to keep her alive. At last, after endless days of struggle, the edge of Veari space appeared before them. The sensors lit up with familiar signals, patrol fleets, defense stations, and the shimmering gates that marked the Empire's territory. Lyrina gasped, tears filling her eyes. "We're home?" Daniel gave her a tired smile. "Almost. Don't celebrate yet." Because even as he guided the ship forward, a shadow loomed on the radar. A Draxan strike force larger than anything they had faced yet had followed them into Veari space. The swarm wasn't going to let their prize escape so easily. Daniel gripped the controls, his body aching, his mind burning with exhaustion, but his eyes were steady. "This is it," he muttered. "One last fight." Lyrina turned to him, her voice trembling but strong. "Then we fight together." Daniel glanced at her, surprised, but when he saw the fire in her eyes, he nodded. "All right, kid. Let's show them what humans and princesses are made of." The blackness of space erupted with red warnings. Dozens of Draxan warships appeared on the scanners, closing in fast. Their jagged hulls gleamed with hunger, their weapons already glowing with deadly light. Daniel's jaw tightened. His scout ship was falling apart. Shields at 15%, weapons barely functional. Engines running hot, and against a swarm this size, even the most powerful Veari fleet would struggle. He glanced at Princess Lyrina. She clutched the seat beside him, her eyes glowing faintly in fear, but she did not cry. She looked at him, waiting for his answer, his plan. Daniel gave her a tired smile. "We fight." Lyrina's mandibles twitched. "With this?" She gestured at the small smoking ship. "Yeah," Daniel said, gripping the controls. "With this. With whatever we've got. Humans don't stop just because the odds look bad." The Draxans opened fire. Bolts of green energy streaked across the stars, shaking the ship violently. Daniel swerved, weaving through the storm. The hull groaned, panels sparked, but he held steady. He fired back, the Scout's small cannons blazing. A lucky shot struck one of the Draxan fighters, sending it spinning into an asteroid. "One down," Daniel muttered. "Only 100 more to go." Lyrina stared at him in shock. "How are you so calm?" Daniel laughed grimly. "I'm not calm. I'm terrified. But fear doesn't matter. What matters is what you do next." The battle raged. The scout ship ducked and dodged, slipping through impossible gaps, twisting like a predator far smaller than its hunters. Daniel flew with reckless precision, the kind that made other pilots call humans insane. He brushed past explosions, skimmed the surface of asteroids, and at one point, flew directly through the wreckage of a burning Draxan frigate to shake off pursuit. Lyrina clung to her seat, heart racing, but she began to understand. This was why humans were feared. Not because of their technology, not because of their size, but because they refused to break. Even when surrounded, even when crushed, they fought like cornered beasts. And Daniel was the fiercest beast she had ever seen. But numbers mattered. The Draxans pressed harder, cutting off every escape route. A heavy blast struck the rear of the ship, blowing out the engines. The vessel spun wildly. Warning lights screamed. Daniel slammed the controls with his fist, stabilizing just enough to keep them from crashing into a drifting rock. Smoke filled the cabin. "We've lost engines," Lyrina said, panic in her voice. "Not yet," Daniel growled. He grabbed a manual override lever, forcing emergency thrusters online. The ship jerked violently, spitting flames from its damaged engines, but it kept moving. The Draxans circled like wolves. "This is it," Lyrina whispered. "We cannot escape." Daniel turned to her, eyes burning. "Listen to me. As long as I'm alive, you are not dying here. Understand?" She blinked at him, stunned. For the first time since her capture, she felt hope in the middle of despair. The swarm closed in for the kill. Daniel triggered the last of his ship's mines, releasing them into the path of the pursuers. The asteroids lit up as explosions ripped through the field. Several Draxan ships were torn apart, their broken bodies spinning into the void. But more came. Always more. The scout ship shook as another blast struck. Consoles exploded, sparks showering the cockpit. Daniel's arm was cut by flying metal, blood dripping down his sleeve. He didn't flinch. He just kept flying. "Reactors overheating," Lorena cried. "Shields failing." "Then we fight without them," Daniel said through clenched teeth. He switched the weapons to manual control, firing every last shot. Plasma bolts streaked across the black, slamming into the swarm. One fighter burst apart. Another lost its wing. But for every ship destroyed, 10 more replaced it. It was hopeless. But Daniel didn't know how to surrender. At last, the Draxans launched their boarding craft. Spiked pods slammed against the hull, claws digging in. The sound of tearing metal echoed through the ship. "They're coming inside," Lorena whispered. Daniel grabbed his plasma rifle. He pulled a knife from his belt and handed it to her. "Stay behind me. If they get through me..." "Don't stop fighting." Her eyes widened. I have never killed before." "Then today's a good day to start," Daniel said with a grim smile. The first breach tore open the corridor. Draxan spilled in, screeching with rage. Daniel opened fire, plasma bolts lighting the darkness. The aliens fell one by one, but more pushed forward, claws slashing. Daniel fought like a man possessed. When his rifle overheated, he drew his sidearm. When that ran dry, he used his knife. When the knife broke, he used his fists. Every strike was fueled by sheer willpower, and for the first time, Lorena fought too. She slashed with her knife, her delicate frame moving with desperate strength. A Draxan lunged for Daniel's back, but she drove the blade into its throat. The creature collapsed, screeching. Daniel glanced at her and grinned. "Not bad, princess," she panted, wings trembling. "I learned from the best." They fought until the corridors were slick with alien blood. But the swarm was endless. Daniel's body ached, his wounds burned, and his breath came ragged. Still, he refused to fall. Finally, as another wave surged, the ship shook violently. Outside, beams of golden light streaked across the stars. Veyari reinforcements had arrived. Dozens of Empire warships descended on the battlefield, their elegant hulls blazing. They opened fire, tearing into the Draxan fleet. The swarm screeched in rage, turning to meet the new threat. Daniel slumped against the wall, his rifle hanging loosely in his hands. Relief washed over him, but he forced himself up. "We're not done yet," he said. The Veyari ships pushed the Draxans back, but the fight was far from over. The swarm began to retreat, dragging their wounded ships away. The battle shifted, and for the first time, the odds favored survival. Inside the scout ship, silence fell. Smoke hung in the air. Bodies littered the floor. Daniel leaned against the console, barely standing. His face was pale, his eyes heavy. Lorena looked at him with awe. "You should be dead. Any other being would have broken long ago." Daniel wiped blood from his face and gave her a crooked smile. "Yeah, but I'm human. We don't break easy." She stared at him for a long moment, then whispered, "The galaxy will never believe this." Daniel chuckled softly. "Then we'll just have to show them." When the Veyari soldiers boarded the ship moments later, they froze at the sight before them. One battered human soldier standing among piles of dead Draxans, and beside him their missing princess alive. Gasps filled the air. Some bowed immediately, others stood speechless. Lorena stepped forward, lifting her head high despite the blood on her wings. "This human saved me," she declared. Her voice was clear, strong, filled with pride. "Remember his face. Remember his name. Daniel Reyes." The soldiers looked at him with wide, uncertain eyes. Some whispered in disbelief. Others stared in awe. For in that moment they realized something terrifying and wonderful. If one human could do this, what could an army of them achieve? The Veyari palace was quiet. Too quiet. For days it had been shrouded in fear and mourning. Word of Princess Lorena's capture had spread like fire. Citizens whispered in the streets, soldiers muttered in the barracks, and even the High Council had begun to fear the worst. The queen sat in her chamber, her mandibles folded, wings drooped, her usually brilliant eyes dull with grief. She stared at the communications console, imagining her daughter in the hands of the Draxans. Each day without news felt like centuries. Each silence tore her heart apart. "Mother," a voice said behind her. It was a young soldier, trembling. "The princess. She's alive." She's returning, and a human brought her back. The queen's body stiffened. A human? She had long doubted their strength, calling them primitive and reckless. Could it be true? Could a human, one of the Deathworlders, have actually done what her fleet could not? Her claws trembled as she rose. "Prepare the halls," she whispered. "Prepare the welcome, and ensure the human is honored." Even she felt disbelief. Outside the palace, Daniel's scout ship limped into orbit. It was battered, smoke drifting from the engines, but it had survived. Beside him, Lyrina clutched the seat, her wings weak from exhaustion but her eyes glowing with life. She had made it home. "Almost there," Daniel said softly. "Just hold on a little longer." The docking clamps engaged and the small ship shuddered as it locked in place. Lyrina jumped out first, almost stumbling but steadying herself. She turned to Daniel, her voice shaking with emotion. You brought me home," she said. "You saved me." Daniel gave a tired smile. "Told you. No one left behind." She reached for his hand. I want everyone to know your name. Captain Daniel Reyes, human soldier. The one who saved me." Daniel looked away, uncomfortable. Humans weren't known for seeking glory. They survived because they had to, not because they wanted recognition. But something about her pride made him feel lighter. "All right," he muttered. "Let's get inside." The palace gates opened. Soldiers and citizens alike gathered, staring in awe at the human who had dared to challenge the Draxans. Even the veteran warriors of the Veari stopped in disbelief. The queen emerged, her eyes locking onto the small broken ship, then onto the figure beside it. Daniel's armor was scorched, his face bruised and bloody. His rifle was held loosely at his side. He looked like a man who had walked through death and returned. For a moment, the queen could not move. She blinked, unsure if what she saw was real. Then from behind him, Lyrina called out, "Mom! I'm back! He saved me!" The words echoed through the plaza, stopping every heart. The queen's wings spread wide. Her claws trembled as she surged forward. She scooped her daughter into her arms, tears streaming down her face. And then slowly her eyes turned to Daniel. The silence was deafening. Soldiers and citizens alike held their breath. The queen, proud and unyielding, knelt before the human. The gesture was unheard of. A monarch kneeling to an alien soldier. "Human," she said, her voice shaking with awe. You risked everything for my child." Daniel stepped forward, bowing slightly. "Your Majesty, I did what any human would do." The queen's eyes softened. "No, you did what none of us would dare. You are extraordinary." Whispers spread through the plaza. The human saved a princess. The human survived a Draxan strike. The human did what no Veari could. For the first time, the galaxy began to see humanity not as fragile outsiders, but as something different. Stubborn, resilient, and fearless. In the following days, the palace was alive with celebrations. Princess Lyrina was reunited with her tutors and friends. Soldiers recounted tales of Daniel's bravery, his unyielding determination, his refusal to surrender. Yet Daniel remained quiet. He did not seek honor or praise. He spent his time checking the ship, resting, and listening to Lyrina recount every detail of her captivity. "You never gave up," she said. One evening, as they watched the twin moons rise over the palace city, even when they outnumbered you, even when everything was falling apart, you never stopped. Daniel shrugged, though his hand brushed a scar on his arm. "I didn't stop because someone had to make sure you lived. Humans survive because we care, sometimes more than we should." She looked at him with admiration. "I don't know if I will ever be able to repay you." "You don't have to," he said. "Just promise me you'll lead your people well." That's enough. But the galaxy was already talking. Across systems, news spread of a human who had defied the Draxans, fought alone, and saved a princess. Other alien races whispered in fear and awe. Humans, long dismissed as primitive, were beginning to earn respect. Even some of the Veari skeptics changed their minds. If a single human could achieve so much, what might an army of humans accomplish? The queen summoned Daniel one morning. The grand hall shimmered with crystals and banners. Lyrina sat beside her mother, her eyes bright with excitement. "Daniel Reyes," the queen began, her voice calm but firm, "you have done what no Veari could. You have returned my daughter to me. You have risked your life against impossible odds. The Empire owes you a debt it may never fully repay." Daniel bowed. "I did not do it for reward." "Yet," the queen said, Your courage has earned humanity a place among the stars. You have proven that your kind, your people, are to be respected. Daniel felt a strange warmth. Respect from the Veari was one thing, but this was a recognition of his humanity. And it felt right. Princess Lyrina, the queen continued, will you tell them yourself? Lyrina stood. She looked at the assembly, then at Daniel, then spoke clearly. This human saved me. He fought when all hope was gone. He brought me back to my mother, back to my home. Remember his name. Remember what he did. Remember that humans are not weak. The hall erupted in whispers and murmurs. Soldiers nodded in respect. Citizens bowed. Aliens who had once scorned humans began to see them in a new light. Daniel just smiled faintly. I was just doing my job, he muttered, but everyone knew it was more than a job. Days later, as the celebrations quieted, Daniel prepared to leave. The scout ship was patched up just enough to make the journey back to human space. Lyrina hugged him tightly, her wings brushing his armor. Promise me you'll come back, she said softly. I promise, he replied. I'll always check on my people. And on you. The queen approached, regal and proud. Captain Daniel Reyes, you have done more than save a princess. You have saved a legacy and reminded the galaxy why humans survive. The Veari will never forget you. Daniel bowed again. It was my honor, Your Majesty. As the small scout ship lifted from the palace, Daniel looked back. The twin moons glimmered, the city of crystal sparkled, and the princess waved from the balcony. He turned to the stars ahead. The galaxy was vast, dangerous, and full of challenges. But one truth had been made clear. Humans were not just survivors. Humans were protectors, fighters, and legends in their own right. And somewhere, far across the stars, whispers began to spread. If one human could do this alone, what could an entire fleet achieve? Daniel Reyes smiled beneath his visor. The galaxy had just begun to understand.